Toxic relationship. Detox, a Stoic survival guide. Here's something no one wants to hear, but everyone needs to know. The person destroying your peace of mind isn't going to suddenly wake up one day and decide to change. They won't have an epiphany about how their behavior affects you. They won't magically transform into the partner you've been hoping they'd become. And the hardest truth of all? You can't love someone into being a better person. Right now, you're probably thinking about that one relationship that left you questioning your own sanity. Maybe you're still in it, walking on eggshells every single day. Maybe you escaped, but you're still carrying the emotional baggage like a heavy suitcase you can't seem to put down. Either way, you clicked on this video because something inside you knows that enough is enough. The ancient Stoics faced the same human drama we deal with today. They understood something profound about toxic relationships that modern psychology is just starting to catch up with. They knew that your power doesn't lie in changing other people. It lies in how you respond to them. Today, I'm going to share their timeless wisdom with you in a way that will completely shift how you handle toxic people forever. 1. The emotional vampire test. There's a silent killer in your social circle that you probably haven't identified yet. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic outbursts or obvious manipulation. Instead, it works like a slow poison, draining your energy one interaction at a time until you find yourself exhausted for reasons you can't explain. The most dangerous toxic people aren't the ones who scream and throw tantrums. They're the ones who leave you feeling empty after every conversation. Yet you can't pinpoint exactly what went wrong. You know that feeling when you walk away from certain people and suddenly feel like someone sucked the life out of you? That's not coincidence. That's not you being overly sensitive. That's your body's natural alarm system trying to warn you about something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Most relationship advice tells you to watch for red flags, like lying or cheating. But those are amateur hour compared to the real threat. The real danger comes from people who specialize in subtle energy theft. They've mastered the art of making you feel responsible for their emotions, while simultaneously making you doubt your own. They leave conversations open-ended, so you're always thinking about them. They share just enough personal drama to make you feel needed, but never enough resolution to give you peace. They ask for advice they never take and create problems they never solve. Here's what's fascinating about energy vampires. They don't even realize they're doing it most of the time. They've learned that creating emotional dependency keeps people close, so they unconsciously manufacture situations that require your emotional labor. They become addicted to your attention the same way someone becomes addicted to a drug, and they'll do whatever it takes to get their next fix. But here's where ancient wisdom meets modern psychology in the most powerful way possible. The Stoics understood something about human energy that we're just rediscovering today. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the danger of borrowing trouble from others and warned against allowing external chaos to disturb internal peace. He knew that your emotional state is your responsibility and your power. The emperor who ruled the Roman Empire had a simple test for the people in his life. He paid attention to how he felt after spending time with them. Not during the interaction when politeness and social conditioning kick in, but afterward when the dust settled and his true feelings emerged. This brings us to our first strategy, out of 8 total strategies I'm sharing with you today. Strategy number 1 is called the emotional vampire test, and it's built around what I call the 3-hour rule. Here's how it works. After you interact with someone, whether it's a phone call, text conversation, or in-person meeting, pay attention to exactly how you feel 3 hours later. Not immediately after, because adrenaline and social momentum can mask the real impact. 3 hours is when your nervous system has processed the interaction, and your body reveals the truth. If you feel energized, curious, or motivated 3 hours later, that person added value to your life. If you feel drained, anxious, confused, or inexplicably sad, that person took energy from you. It's that simple. Your body doesn't lie about these things. Your mind might make excuses or rationalize the behavior, but your energy levels tell the real story. The beautiful thing about this test is that it removes all the guesswork from toxic relationships. You don't have to analyze their intentions or figure out if they're manipulating you on purpose. You don't have to make lists of their behaviors or keep track of patterns. You just have to check in with yourself 3 hours after every interaction and ask one question: do I feel better or worse than I did before? This strategy works because toxic people operate through energy extraction. They can't help themselves. Even when they're trying to be nice or supportive, they still find ways to make the conversation about their needs, their problems, or their emotional state. Meanwhile, healthy people leave you feeling inspired, understood, or at peace because they operate through energy exchange rather than energy theft. Start implementing the 3-hour rule today with everyone in your life. You'll be shocked at what you discover about the people closest to you. 2. The reverse psychology of boundaries. Everything you've been taught about setting boundaries with toxic people is backwards, and that's why it never works. Traditional advice tells you to communicate your limits clearly, explain why certain behaviors are unacceptable, and enforce consequences when people cross the line. But here's the problem with that approach. It assumes toxic people care about your boundaries, respect your explanations, and fear your consequences. They don't. In fact, telling a toxic person about your boundaries is like giving them a roadmap to your vulnerabilities. You've just shown them exactly which buttons to press and exactly how much pressure it takes to get a reaction from you. They file this information away and use it against you later. The more you explain why something bothers you, the more ammunition you give them for future manipulation. Toxic people don't respect boundaries. They test them. They push against them. They find creative ways to cross them while making you feel like you're overreacting. They turn your boundary setting into evidence that you're controlling, unreasonable, or difficult. Then you end up defending your right to have boundaries instead of simply maintaining them. But what if I told you there's a way to make toxic people police themselves without them even realizing it? What if you could create boundaries that are so subtle and effective that manipulators actually start modifying their own behavior to accommodate you? This isn't wishful thinking. This is ancient psychology that works every single time when applied correctly. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus spent years as a slave before becoming one of history's greatest teachers of personal freedom. He understood better than anyone the difference between what you can control and what you cannot control. You cannot control other people's behavior, but you can control your response to it. You cannot control their choices, but you can control your availability for their drama. Epictetus taught that true power comes not from changing external circumstances, but from changing your relationship to those circumstances. This principle becomes devastating when applied to toxic relationships because it flips the entire power dynamic upside down. Instead of trying to get them to respect your boundaries, you simply make their disrespect irrelevant. Here's where strategy number 2 out of our 8 total strategies becomes a game changer. I call it the reverse psychology of boundaries, and it's based on a technique I call the mirror method. Instead of setting boundaries for other people, you set them for yourself and let their behavior bounce off you like light off a mirror. Here's how this works in practice. When someone treats you poorly, you don't explain why it's wrong or ask them to stop. You simply mirror their energy level back to them without any emotional charge. If they're cold, you become neutral. If they're dramatic, you become calm. If they're demanding, you become unavailable. You don't announce this strategy. You don't explain what you're doing. You just do it. The magic happens because toxic people depend on emotional reactions to maintain control. They need you to get upset, defensive, or hurt because that's how they know their manipulation is working. When you respond to their behavior with the same energy they're giving you, minus the emotional charge, something fascinating happens. They start experiencing the impact of their own behavior reflected back at them. A person who interrupts you constantly suddenly finds themselves being interrupted. Someone who cancels plans last minute discovers that your schedule has become mysteriously full. A person who takes hours to respond to your messages finds that you've adopted the same communication style. They experience their own behavior without being able to blame you for being reactive or unreasonable. The beauty of this approach is that you're not being mean or manipulative. You're simply matching their demonstrated level of investment in the relationship. If they treat you like an option, you treat them like an option. If they make you a low priority, they become a low priority for you too. This isn't revenge. This is natural consequence. Most toxic people have never experienced their own behavior reflected back to them because everyone else either tolerates it or fights against it. When you mirror without reacting, you force them to confront the reality of how they treat people. Many will actually start treating you better because they don't like how it feels to receive their own energy back. 3. The indifference immunity. Here's a truth that will make you uncomfortable before it sets you free. The reason toxic people have so much power over you isn't because they're particularly skilled manipulators. It's because you care too much about what they think, how they feel, and whether they approve of you. Your caring is the hook they use to reel you in, and your emotional investment is the chain that keeps you trapped. Society has programmed you to believe that caring deeply about others is always virtuous, that emotional investment equals love, and that detachment means you're cold or uncaring. But this programming makes you vulnerable to people who exploit empathy for personal gain. The more you care about someone's opinion, the more power you give them to hurt you. Ancient Stoics understood something profound about human relationships that modern therapy is just beginning to rediscover. They knew that true strength comes not from caring more, but from caring selectively. They practiced what they called preferred indifference, which means treating external things as neither inherently good nor bad, but simply as circumstances that exist. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally dead or shutting down your capacity for love. It means developing the wisdom to know the difference between people who deserve your emotional investment and people who exploit it. It means understanding that your peace of mind is more valuable than anyone's approval, including people you care about. The Stoics practiced strategic emotional detachment as a form of self-preservation. They understood that you cannot control how others treat you, but you can control how much their treatment affects your internal state. They knew that suffering comes not from external events, but from your attachment to how those events should unfold. Here's where strategy number 3 out of our 8 strategies becomes your psychological armor. I call it indifference immunity, and it's the counterintuitive practice of caring less in order to protect more. This isn't about becoming cold or uncaring. This is about becoming strategically detached from outcomes you cannot control. When you practice indifference immunity, you stop needing toxic people to change. You stop hoping they'll suddenly become reasonable. You stop taking their behavior personally because you understand that their actions reflect their character, not your worth. You develop what I call emotional fireproofing, where their attempts to hurt you simply cannot catch fire in your mind. Here's how to implement this immediately. Start treating toxic people's opinions like weather reports from a country you'll never visit. Interesting information, perhaps, but completely irrelevant to your daily decisions. When they criticize you, respond with the same energy you'd give to someone commenting on a movie you've never seen. When they try to make you feel guilty, receive their guilt trip like you'd receive a commercial for a product you don't need. The transformation happens when you realize that their approval was never necessary for your happiness anyway. Their disapproval cannot diminish your worth. Their manipulation cannot touch your core identity. Their drama cannot disturb your inner peace unless you give it permission to do so. This level of emotional independence terrifies toxic people because they lose their primary tool of control over you. When you stop needing their validation, they can no longer withhold it as punishment. When you stop fearing their anger, they can no longer use it as a weapon. When you stop taking responsibility for their emotions, they're forced to deal with their own psychological issues without using you as a dumping ground. Practice indifference immunity by asking yourself one question whenever someone tries to upset you. Will this matter in 5 years? If the answer is no, treat it with the indifference it deserves. Your emotional energy is precious. Spend it wisely. The exit strategy philosophy. The biggest lie you tell yourself about toxic relationships is that you'll leave when things get bad enough. You create imaginary lines in the sand and promise yourself that if they just cross this one final boundary, you'll walk away for good. But here's what actually happens. They cross the line, you move the line, and suddenly you're living in a reality you swore you'd never tolerate. Most people fail to leave toxic relationships not because they lack courage, but because they never prepared mentally for the exit. They wait for the perfect moment, the final straw, or the dramatic incident that will...
Some people will do anything to justify their departure. Meanwhile, toxic people specialize in keeping you just comfortable enough to stay and just miserable enough to doubt yourself. The Romans didn't build the greatest empire in history by waiting for perfect conditions to make strategic moves. They succeeded because their generals understood that victory belongs to those who prepare for battle long before the first sword is drawn. They practiced something called premeditatio malorum, which means rehearsing difficulties before they occur so you're ready when they actually happen. Stoic philosophers applied this same principle to personal relationships. They understood that emotional preparation is just as important as practical preparation when it comes to major life changes. They knew that the mind needs time to adjust to new realities and that sudden decisions made in emotional states rarely lead to lasting transformation. You cannot leave a toxic relationship successfully if you're still emotionally dependent on the toxic person for validation, entertainment, or identity. You cannot break free if you haven't built the internal resources necessary to stand alone. You cannot escape if you're still hoping they'll change or still believing that leaving makes you the bad person in the story. This practice does something powerful to your subconscious mind. It begins to see independence as a real possibility rather than a distant dream. It starts building neural pathways that support self-reliance instead of codependency. It prepares your nervous system for the reality of change so that when you finally take action, your body doesn't sabotage your mind with fear and doubt. The second part of this strategy involves building what I call escape resources while you're still in the relationship. This means developing friendships they don't control, hobbies they don't influence, and sources of validation they cannot touch. It means creating financial independence, emotional support systems, and personal interests that exist completely outside of their sphere of influence. Every day you remain in a toxic relationship without preparing for your exit is a day that makes leaving harder. But every day you spend building internal and external resources for independence is a day that makes freedom more inevitable. Start your philosophical rehearsal today. Your future self will thank you. 5. The toxicity antidote. There's a reason why certain people seem immune to manipulation while others attract toxic relationships like magnets. It has nothing to do with luck, looks, or social status. It has everything to do with where they source their sense of worth. People who need external validation to feel good about themselves send out invisible signals that manipulators can detect from across a crowded room. Think about it like this. If your self-worth depends on compliments, approval, and positive feedback from others, what happens when someone withholds those things? You become desperate to earn them back. You start changing your behavior, compromising your values, and accepting treatment you know you shouldn't tolerate just to get that validation fix you're craving. Toxic people study you like scientists studying lab rats. They quickly identify what you need emotionally and then control the supply. If you need to feel important, they'll make you feel special at first, then gradually make you work harder and harder for that same feeling. If you need to feel loved, they'll shower you with affection initially, then use the threat of withdrawal to control your behavior. But here's what toxic people cannot manipulate. They cannot control someone whose sense of worth comes from within. They cannot manipulate someone who doesn't need their approval to feel valuable. They cannot exploit someone whose identity isn't dependent on external circumstances or other people's opinions. The ancient Stoics understood this principle better than any modern self-help guru ever could. They practiced what they called self-examination, which wasn't about harsh self-criticism or perfectionism. It was about developing such a clear understanding of your own values, capabilities, and worth that no external voice could shake your foundation. Marcus Aurelius spent time each morning reminding himself of his own principles and each evening reviewing how well he lived up to them. Not to judge himself harshly, but to maintain a clear internal compass that couldn't be influenced by the opinions, flattery, or criticism of others. He built his identity on his own assessment of his character rather than on Rome's assessment of his performance. This practice made him impossible to manipulate because manipulators had nothing to work with. They couldn't threaten to withdraw approval he didn't need. They couldn't offer validation he already possessed. They couldn't make him doubt himself because he had a clear, internally generated understanding of who he was and what he stood for. Strategy number 5 out of our 8 strategies is called the toxicity antidote, and it's based on building unshakable self-worth from within. This isn't about positive affirmations or fake confidence. This is about developing such a solid relationship with yourself that other people's opinions become interesting but irrelevant information. Here's how to build internal worth that toxic people cannot touch. Start each day by identifying 3 things you respect about your own character that have nothing to do with other people's opinions. Maybe you kept a promise you made to yourself. Maybe you chose honesty when lying would have been easier. Maybe you showed kindness when no one was watching. The key is that these things must be based on your actions and choices, not on external achievements or other people's responses. Your worth cannot be tied to your job performance, relationship status, or social media likes, because those things can be manipulated or taken away. Your worth must be tied to qualities that exist independent of circumstances. End each day by asking yourself 3 questions. Did I act according to my values today? Did I treat myself with the same kindness I'd show a good friend? Did I make choices based on my own judgment, rather than fear of other people's reactions? This daily practice builds what I call internal validation, which is the only validation that actually lasts. When you develop genuine self-worth, something magical happens in your relationships. You stop accepting poor treatment because you know you deserve better. You stop explaining yourself to people who should already understand. You stop seeking approval from people whose values don't align with yours. You become selective about who gets access to your time, energy, and emotional investment. Toxic people can sense this shift immediately, and most of them will remove themselves from your life without any dramatic confrontation. They instinctively know they cannot manipulate someone who doesn't need what they have to offer. Your internal strength becomes your protection, and your self-knowledge becomes your freedom. Build your toxicity antidote one day at a time. The investment you make in your relationship with yourself pays dividends in every other relationship you'll ever have. After you escape a toxic relationship, there's a dangerous phase that, honestly, no one really talks about. It's that phase where you're finally free, but your mind hasn't quite caught up to your new reality yet. You might find yourself angry, bitter, and suspicious of everyone who tries to get close to you. You've built walls so high to protect yourself that, well, you can't figure out how to let healthy people in. This is the recovery trap that keeps people emotionally imprisoned long after they've physically escaped their toxic situation. You survived the relationship, but you're still carrying its poison in your system. You're free from their manipulation, but, you're not free from the fear, resentment, and trust issues they left behind. Many people make the mistake of thinking that leaving the toxic person is the end of the journey. But leaving is just the beginning. The real work starts when you have to rebuild your capacity for healthy relationships without becoming cynical about human nature. You have to process the betrayal without letting it define how you see the world. The Stoics had a practice that, honestly, modern psychology has completely overlooked. They called it memento mori, which means remembering death or accepting impermanence. They used this practice not to become depressed about mortality, but to develop acceptance of life's temporary nature. Everything ends. Every relationship has a season. Every experience is finite. When applied to toxic relationships, this principle becomes incredibly healing because it removes the burden of trying to make sense of senseless behavior. You don't have to understand why they treated you badly. You don't have to figure out what you did wrong. You don't have to get closure or apologies or explanations. You just have to accept that it happened, it's over, and it's time to move forward. Here's strategy number 6 out of our 8 strategies. I call it the recovery roadmap, and it's designed to help you heal without closing your heart to future possibilities. The goal isn't to forget what happened or pretend it didn't hurt. The goal is to process the experience in a way that makes you wiser, without making you bitter. Start by accepting that some people will disappoint you, and that disappointment is information, not identity. Their betrayal tells you about their character, not about your worth. Their inability to love you properly tells you about their limitations, not about your lovability. Their manipulation tells you about their insecurity, not about your gullibility. Practice gratitude for the lessons the toxic relationship taught you. Not gratitude for the pain, but gratitude for the wisdom. You now know red flags you couldn't see before. You understand manipulation tactics that won't work on you again. You've developed strength you didn't know you possessed. These are valuable gifts that came at a high price, but they're still gifts. The most important part of recovery is rebuilding trust in your own judgment. Toxic people specialize in making you doubt your instincts, question your perceptions, and second-guess your decisions. Recovery means learning to trust yourself again. It means believing that you can spot healthy people and make good relationship choices. Start small with this trust-building process. Make minor decisions based on your instincts and notice that you're usually right. Pay attention to how you feel around different people and trust those feelings. Practice saying no without extensive justification and observe that the world doesn't end. The beautiful thing about recovering from toxicity is that it makes you incredibly attractive to healthy people. Your boundaries become clear, your standards become higher, your tolerance for dysfunction becomes non-existent. You start radiating the kind of self-respect that draws in people who also respect themselves. Recovery isn't about forgetting the past. It's about integrating the experience in a way that serves your future. You can acknowledge what happened without letting it control what happens next. 7. The prevention protocol. Here's something that will change how you see yourself forever. If you keep attracting toxic people into your life, you're unconsciously advertising that you're available for their dysfunction. You're sending out signals that you don't even realize you're broadcasting, and manipulators are picking up those signals like sharks detecting blood in the water. The most common signal you send is people-pleasing behavior. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you apologize for things that aren't your fault, every time you over-explain your decisions or ask permission for things you have every right to do, you're essentially putting up a sign that says, "Manipulate me, I'll probably let you." Toxic people don't target confident, boundaried individuals because those people are too much work. They target people who seem desperate for approval, who apologize frequently, who sacrifice their own needs to make others comfortable, and who seem afraid of conflict. If this describes you, you've been unknowingly attracting the exact type of people you want to avoid. But here's the good news. Once you understand the signals you've been sending, you can completely change the type of people who approach you. You can develop what I call a philosophical backbone that repels manipulators while attracting healthy, respectful individuals. You can become the type of person toxic people instinctively avoid. People pleasers become magnets for toxic personalities because they provide everything a manipulator needs. They provide attention without requiring reciprocity. They provide emotional labor without expecting appreciation. They provide forgiveness without requiring change. They provide relationship benefits without relationship responsibilities. Think about it from a toxic person's perspective. Why would they choose someone who challenges them, holds them accountable, and expects mutual respect, when they could choose someone who accepts poor treatment and makes excuses for their behavior? They're not stupid. They choose the path of least resistance. And unfortunately, people pleasers offer no resistance at all. The ancient Stoics understood that respect is not something you demand from others. Respect is something you demonstrate for yourself through your actions, choices, and boundaries. When you respect yourself, others have no choice but to respect you too or remove themselves from your life. Both outcomes protect you from toxic relationships. Epictetus taught that your reputation is built not on what you say about yourself, but on what you consistently demonstrate through your behavior. If you consistently demonstrate that you'll accept poor treatment, people will consistently treat you poorly. If you consistently demonstrate that you value yourself, people will value you too. This brings us to strategy number 7 out of our 8 strategies. I call it the prevention protocol, and it's based on developing the kind of presence that naturally repels toxic people while attracting healthy ones. This isn't about being aggressive or mean. This is about being selectively available and consistently self-respecting. Here's how to implement this starting today. Practice the art of saying no without lengthy explanations. When someone asks you to do something you don't want to do, simply say, "I can't commit to that right now," or "That doesn't work for me." Don't explain why. Don't apologize. Don't offer alternatives unless you genuinely want to help. Stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Stop saying sorry for having opinions, taking up space, or existing as a human being with needs and preferences. Reserve your apologies for times when you've actually done something wrong, and even then, apologize once and move on. Develop what I call comfortable silence. When someone says something inappropriate, manipulative, or disrespectful, don't rush to fill the awkward silence with nervous chatter or attempts to smooth things over. Let the awkwardness exist. Let them sit with the discomfort of their own poor behavior. Start expressing preferences confidently. Instead of saying, "I don't care," whatever you want to do, say, "I'd prefer this option." Instead of, "I'm probably wrong," but maybe say, "I think we should consider this." Instead of, "Sorry to bother you," say, "I have a question." The transformation happens gradually as you consistently demonstrate self-respect through small daily choices. Toxic people start avoiding you because you're no longer an easy target. Healthy people start gravitating toward you because they recognize and appreciate authentic confidence. Your prevention protocol isn't just about avoiding toxic people. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally attracts healthy relationships and naturally repels dysfunction. It's about building a life where respect is the baseline, not the exception. Everything I've shared with you means nothing if you can't apply it when you're actually facing a real toxic person in a real situation with real emotions involved. Knowledge without application is just entertainment, and transformation without integration is just temporary inspiration. The true test of these Stoic principles comes when someone pushes every button you have, and you have to choose between your old patterns and your new wisdom. Here's what's going to happen when you start implementing these strategies. The toxic people in your life are going to escalate their behavior at first. They're going to test your new boundaries harder than ever before because they sense that their control over you is slipping. They might become more dramatic, more demanding, or more manipulative because the tactics that used to work aren't working anymore. This escalation phase is where most people abandon their progress and go back to their old people-pleasing patterns. They mistake the temporary increase in chaos for evidence that the strategies aren't working, when actually it's proof that the strategies are working too well for the toxic person's comfort. This is exactly when you need to stay strongest in your commitment to change. The second challenge you'll face is pressure from people who benefited from your old doormat behavior. Friends who are used to you always being available will guilt you about your new boundaries. Family members who relied on your people-pleasing will accuse you of becoming selfish or difficult. Some people will actually prefer the old version of you because that version was easier to take advantage of. This is where you discover who genuinely cares about your well-being versus who just enjoyed the benefits of your dysfunction. Real friends will support your growth even when it's less convenient for them. Toxic friends will try to sabotage your progress because it threatens their access to your resources. Ancient Stoics called this the discipline of desire, which means learning to want what serves your highest good rather than what feels comfortable in the moment. Applying these principles will feel uncomfortable at first because you're rewiring years of conditioning. Your brain will try to pull you back to familiar patterns, even when those patterns were destroying your peace of mind. This is our final strategy, number 8 out of 8. I call it wisdom integration, and it's about maintaining your new mindset when everything inside and around you is pressuring you to go back to your old ways. This is where philosophy becomes practical and where ancient wisdom meets modern life. Here's your implementation roadmap for real situations. When someone tries to guilt you into changing your boundaries, just remind yourself that their discomfort with your limits is not your responsibility to fix. And when someone escalates their behavior because your old reactions aren't available anymore, see it as confirmation that you're on the right path, not as a reason to doubt yourself. Practice the pause before you respond to manipulation attempts. Take 3 deep breaths and ask yourself what the Stoic response would be before you react emotionally. Remember, your goal isn't to change them or punish them. Your goal is to maintain your own integrity and peace of mind, regardless of how they choose to behave. When people try to pull you back into old patterns by saying things like, "You've changed," or "You used to be so much nicer," just remember that this is actually a compliment disguised as criticism. Of course you've changed. That was the entire point. The version of you that tolerated disrespect and sacrificed your well-being for others' comfort needed to change. Create what I call implementation anchors. These are specific phrases you can use in challenging moments to stay grounded in your new philosophy. Phrases like, "That doesn't work for me, I'll think about it and get back to you," or "I understand you're upset, but my decision stands." Practice these phrases until they become automatic responses. The most important part of wisdom integration is self-compassion during the learning process. You will make mistakes. You will sometimes revert to old patterns. You will occasionally let toxic people cross boundaries you thought you had established. This is normal and expected. Progress isn't perfection. Progress is really just trending in the right direction over time. Celebrate small victories. Notice when you said no without over-explaining. Acknowledge when you didn't take someone's bad mood personally. Recognize when you chose your peace of mind over someone else's approval. These small moments of applied wisdom, add up to massive transformation over time. So, you now have 8 powerful strategies that can completely transform how you handle toxic relationships. But more importantly, you have ancient wisdom that stood the test of time, because it works with human nature rather than against it. The Stoics weren't just philosophers sitting in ivory towers. They were real people, dealing with real relationship challenges, and they developed these principles through trial and testing in the messiness of actual life. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it puts you back in control of your own experience. You don't have to wait for toxic people to change. You don't have to hope they'll suddenly develop empathy or respect. And you certainly don't have to waste years trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed. You can start protecting your peace of mind and building healthier relationships right now, today, with the very next interaction you have. Just remember, implementing these strategies is a practice, not a performance. Some days you'll nail it perfectly, and other days, you'll forget everything I've taught you and fall back into old patterns. That's completely normal and honestly part of the growth process. What really matters is that you keep coming back to these principles and applying them consistently over time. Your future self is counting on the decisions you make today. Every boundary you set, every time you choose self-respect over people-pleasing, every moment you apply these Stoic principles, you're building a life where toxic relationships simply cannot survive. You're creating space for the healthy, respectful connections you truly deserve. The wisdom is yours now. The tools are in your hands. The only question left is whether you'll use them. I believe you will, because you wouldn't have watched this far if you weren't serious about change. Your transformation starts now.